All right. Well, hola, buenos dias, and that's all the Spanish I know. So there you go. It, it's good to be with you all this morning. Really appreciate being here. And I've been a pastor. And I've been a pastor in the Nazarene Church for a long time now. I've been a pastor in the Nazarene Church since the 1900s.
He sido pastor en la iglesia del Nazareno desde los años 1900.
Yep, since June of 1999, so 22 years now.
Desde junio 1999, entonces 22 años ya.
I currently serve as an associate pastor in Lancaster, California, which is about an hour north of Los Angeles.
Estoy sirviendo como pastor asociado en Lancaster, California, que es como una hora norte de Los Ángeles.
And I'm married to my wife, Wendy, and we've been married 25 years now.
He estado casado con mi esposa Wendy por 25 años.
And I've been ordained in the Nazarene Church as an elder for about 10 years.
He sido ordenado como presbítero en la iglesia por 10 años.
I wanted to thank Christian for inviting me to speak with you today.
Le quiero dar gracias a Christian por invitarme a hablar con ustedes hoy.
So he told me that the topic was premarital sex and if Christians should be having premarital sex.
Me dijo que el tema era el sexo antes de matrimonio y si él debería de tenerlo.
No, probably not. Thank you for your time, everybody. It's been great. It's been fun. Thank you very much.
No, creo que no. Gracias por su tiempo.
That's it, right? We're done. That's all good. What am I going to say in response to the first discussion and the first what we got to see there? I have nothing.
Más de lo que ya se dijo.
I will say this. When I began as a youth pastor in 1999, there was a movement called True Love Waits. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of that.
Cuando yo empecé como pastor en 1999, había un movimiento que se llamaba El Amor Verdadero Espera.
The True Love Waits was encouraging teenagers not to have sex until they were married.
Ese movimiento estaba animando a jóvenes a no tener sexo antes de que se casaran.
And with that in mind, I actually used a book, using that book to talk about True Love Waits with the very first teenagers that we worked with.
Entonces yo usé el libro de ese movimiento para hablar con nuestros jóvenes acerca de que el amor verdadero espera.
The book actually taught even that students weren't even to be physical with someone of the opposite sex and never even be left alone with someone of the opposite sex.
El libro enseñaba que los jóvenes ni siquiera deberían tener algo físico con otra persona o no deberían estar solos con otra persona del otro sexo.
We discussed all the scriptures that you just heard in the first presentation, the Corinthians, the Galatians, the Thessalonians. We talked about all of those different scriptures about fleeing sexual immorality.
Hablamos de todas esas escrituras que vimos en la primera presentación en Corintios, Gálatas, y habla de huir de la inmoralidad sexual.
We had discussions as a group about, we asked the question, are you committing adultery by having sex with someone that may not end up being your spouse? And most of the kids said yes.
Hablábamos en grupos y preguntábamos cosas como, ¿es adulterio tener sexo con alguien que quizá no va a ser tu esposo o esposa? Y muchos de ellos decían que sí.
We talked about the fact that since a child may result from having sex, then obviously we should wait to have sex with the person that we would marry because a child may be the result of sleeping with someone else.
Hablamos de que quizá el resultado de tener sexo con otra persona puede ser un hijo. Entonces, sería sabio esperar hasta tener sexo porque ese puede ser un resultado.
We talked about the fact that most people, even non-believers, unchurched kids, imagine losing their virginity to a person that they believe or subconsciously hope they'll end up with forever. That's what most people, even unchurched people, believe, that they're going to end up, whoever they sleep with, whoever they lose their virginity to, they're going to end up being with forever.
hablamos de que la mayoría de los jóvenes piensan, aún jóvenes que no van a la iglesia o que no tienen religión, piensan o esperan, quizás subliminalmente, que la persona a quien le dan su virginidad va a ser la persona con quien ellos van a estar juntos para siempre.
We talked about what it have self-control. I actually put up one of my favorite verses that I used back then all the time over there. You can see it. 1 John 2:16. If someone wants to read that out loud, you can see it over there in the chat. 1 John 2:16. If someone wants to read it in Spanish, go right ahead.
Uno de los versículos que usaba mucho era 1 de Juan 2:16. Y si alguien lo quiere leer en español.
I love that passage. I really like that passage because it basically said that those things that we lust after, the things that we want, those are all not from God, but from the world.
Me encanta ese pasaje porque habla acerca de nuestros deseos, no son de Dios, pero vienen del mundo.
That pretty much, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, that pretty much explains how social media works. And that's why people go on social media to post all about the three things.
Los deseos de la carne, deseos de los ojos y la vanagloria de la vida, eso básicamente está describiendo a las redes sociales. Por eso las personas usan redes sociales.
Titus, we got into the book of Titus, and you can see over there another thing from Titus that it says, I'll have someone read it out loud. You can see it over there in English, but if you want to read it in Spanish, go right ahead.
Tenemos también a Tito.
So we talked about what it means to have self-control. What does it mean? And I talked about this with all my students, high school, junior high students. What does it mean to have self-control?
Y hablábamos con los jóvenes, ¿qué quiere decir tener dominio propio?
We discussed whether waiting until you're married is a way of practicing self-control, and all the students said yes.
Discutimos si el esperar hasta el matrimonio para tener sexo es dominio propio o una manera de tener dominio propio, y todos dicen que sí.
I can remember one high school girl named Melissa saying, actually very loudly, saying, I don't understand why people can't control themselves.
Yo me acuerdo de una joven, se llamaba Melissa, que dijo fuerte, yo no sé por qué la gente no se puede controlar.
She went on to say maybe that people shouldn't put themselves into places, into situations where things could get out of control fast.
Y dijo, quizá es mejor que no nos pongamos en situaciones en donde las cosas se pueden ir muy rápido.
So that was the first time I taught, and we talked about self-control being one of the fruits of the Spirit. Fruits of the Spirit.
Acerca de que el dominio propio es parte del fruto del Espíritu.
Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Fruits of the Spirit, the evidence that God is in your life.
Amor, gozo, paz, paciencia, dominio propio. Esos son el fruto del Espíritu. Es la evidencia de que Dios está en tu vida.
The first time I tackled this topic was 20 years ago. Every student in my youth group knew the right answers. They knew right and they knew wrong. They knew the ideal that God had in mind when it came to physical intimacy.
Hace 20 años, cada uno de los jóvenes sabían lo que era bien y el mal. Y cuando les preguntábamos estos, ellos sabían lo que Dios quería respecto a intimidad física.
And then, within 3 months of us finishing that series, all 3 couples in my youth group had sex for the first time.
Y luego dentro de 3 meses después de que hablamos de eso, cada uno de los noviazgos en los jóvenes, todos habían tenido relaciones sexuales.
Remember that girl, Melissa, who said that everyone should just control themselves in the first place?
¿Se acuerda de esa muchacha Melissa que dijo todos deben controlarse?
She and a guy in our youth group were caught having sex in the living room of his house by his dad when the dad came home early for lunch from work.
Ella y uno de los jóvenes del grupo fueron encontrados en la casa de ese muchacho por el papá del muchacho.
I've caught 2 of my students having oral sex in the youth room at our church.
Yo he visto o he encontrado a jóvenes teniendo sexo oral en la iglesia.
And of course, they thought that they were still good because they were still virgins and hadn't had intercourse yet. So they didn't even consider what they were doing as sex.
Y por supuesto, ellos pensaron que todavía estaban bien porque todavía eran vírgenes técnicamente, porque no era sexo.
And as a pastor, I've officiated several weddings. And I think every couple that I've officiated a wedding for had sex before they were married, either with each other or sex with other people before they met the person who ended up being their spouse.
Y como pastor he oficiado varias ceremonias de matrimonio, y en cada una que he hecho, yo creo que alguien de ese matrimonio había tenido sexo con otra persona o esa pareja ya había tenido sexo.
Truth be told, I actually called Christian a few days ago saying that I don't have a good track record when it comes to studying this topic with students, because every single time I've discussed this topic, the students wound up having sex with one another afterwards within a month or so after we finished the topic.
Para decirles la verdad, yo le hablé a Cristian y le dije que yo no tengo una buena historia cuando enseño de este tema, porque no mucho después los jóvenes están teniendo sexo.
At the event that I attended with Christian in San Diego last month, one student, a 15-year-old kid, 15-year-old guy, confessed to me that he lost his virginity about 1 month earlier, back in June, and now he was pretty sure it was a mistake because she wasn't the one.
En el evento donde conocí a Cristian, un joven de 15 años me confesó que él había perdido su virginidad hace un mes y pensaba que ahora tenía pena porque pensaba que ella no era la mujer para él.
So I started realizing this in almost every case where the students I knew had premarital sex, they were raised in a very Bible-believing home with Christian parents.
Y me di cuenta de que cada vez que hablábamos de esto y teníamos a jóvenes que tenían relaciones sexuales, ellos habían crecido en un hogar donde creían en la Biblia.
So I started realizing this. I started realizing that I had been putting the cart before the horse when it came to discussing sex with teenagers.
Así que me di cuenta que yo estaba poniendo el carrito antes del caballo cuando estaba hablando del sexo con los jóvenes.
In other words, I made it seem that if the teenagers got their morals right, then they could follow Jesus.
Entonces, en otras palabras, yo estaba diciendo que si los jóvenes podían estar moralmente bien, ellos podían seguir a Jesús.
Ultimately, Jesus asked us to follow him exactly as we are, and then find out what that means along the way.
Pero más que eso, Jesús nos llama a seguirle exactamente como somos, y luego nosotros aprendemos en el camino lo que es vivir como Él quiere.
It's not that we get our morals right first and then we drag Jesus along. Jesus is our leader and we see what he's doing and try to be like that.
No es que tenemos que arreglar nuestros morales y luego seguimos a Jesús. No, Jesús es el líder y nosotros debemos querer ser así como Él.
I had actually been doing damage to the students as a youth leader because I made them try to become moral first instead of actually followers of Jesus first.
Yo les estaba haciendo daño a los jóvenes porque yo quería que ellos sean moralmente bien primero y luego seguidores de Cristo.
I had a student graduate high school and go to the university, and then she came back during Christmas break saying that she no longer wanted to have anything to do with church because her belief in God was wrapped up in everything she was not doing instead of the things that she could have been doing for God.
Tenía una joven que se fue a la universidad y cuando regresó, ella dijo que no quería tener nada con la iglesia porque ella creía en Dios y todo lo que eso era las cosas que no estaba haciendo o no debería hacer, mejor que las cosas que ella podía estar haciendo para Dios.
She pointed out that the True Love Waits movement was really a bad idea.
Ella nos dijo que ese movimiento del amor espera era una mala idea.
Because ultimately, it's getting across to students that true love only equals sex, when in reality,
que le está diciendo a los jóvenes que el amor verdadero solamente tiene que ver con el sexo, cuando en realidad
we learn to love others and we are loved by others and there's no sex involved.
en realidad aprendemos a amar a otros y somos amados por otros y no hay sexo, no se involucra.
Relationships with our parents, relationships with our family, relationships with friends, and there's no sex involved, and yet that's also true love.
Relaciones con nuestros papás y con nuestra familia y con nuestros amigos y no hay sexo allí, pero es amor verdadero.
Do I love God? Do I love Jesus? Do I believe that Jesus represents perfect love?
Amo
Of
a
course.
Dios, amo a Jesús. Creo yo que Jesús representa el amor perfecto. Sí.
Is there sex involved? No.
¿Hay
Of
sexo?
course not.
No, no hay.
And we want kids to not wait to experience the love of God. We want them to experience the love of God now. True love, perfect love, does not wait. It reveals itself to us right now.
Y nosotros no queremos que los jóvenes esperen para conocer el amor verdadero. Nosotros queremos que ellos tengan el amor verdadero ahora, es que se revela a nosotros hoy.
Let me and then this student pointed out to me, I'm going to go back here for a second. This student pointed out that one of the passages I used, and I'm going to put it up there again. We already talked about this. This is the New Living Translation. And if someone wants to read it, it's over in the chat. But we already did this in the NIV version, but this is the New Living Translation.
Y esa joven me dijo que ese versículo que usamos, el 1 de Juan 2:16.
It says on there, for the world only offers a craving for physical pleasure, a craving for everything we see, and in our achievements and possessions. These are not from the Father, but they're from the world. We only emphasize the first part, usually with students, the craving for physical pleasure.
Solo hacemos, solo hacemos énfasis en la primera parte y el placer físico con los jóvenes.
But nobody ever talks about taking pride in our achievements and possessions is wrong and from the world.
Pero nadie habla de cómo tener orgullo en nuestros logros y nuestras posesiones es malo y es del mundo.
Even though taking pride in our achievements is the exact reason everyone began babbling while building the Tower of Babel in Genesis.
Aunque tener orgullo por sus logros era la razón que cuando estaban construyendo la Torre de Babel todos estaban hablando.
Can you imagine a world without awards for achievements?
¿Te puedes imaginar un mundo sin premios para tus logros?
No sports awards, no military awards, no arts and entertainment awards. Guarantee you no politicians talking about what they've accomplished.
No habría premios o trofeos para deportes o para artes y no habría políticos hablando de lo que ellos han logrado.
And so we often talk about one thing, but we don't talk about the other thing. And that's really both. They're equally important because often in scripture, they're all wrapped up together.
Y muy comúnmente hablamos de una cosa, pero no hablamos de la otra. Y en la escritura casi siempre están juntas.
So here's where my thinking changed. And it didn't change about everything. It just made me decide I need to tackle this topic in a different way.
Y aquí es donde cambió mi pensamiento. No cambié todo, pero yo pensé, tengo que ver ese tema en una diferente manera.
Our church once brought in a speaker named Wayne Rice to speak to our parents about how to understand your teenager.
Alguna vez nuestra iglesia invitó a un hermano a hablar a nuestros jóvenes, a los papás de jóvenes, cómo entender a tus jóvenes.
Wayne is the co-founder of Youth Specialties, and he's authored over 50 books on youth ministry. He knows what he's talking about.
Es uno de los líderes en el Ministerio de Jóvenes y ha escrito 50 libros de este tema. Entonces, él sabe de lo que está hablando.
He began his seminar by explaining that the idea of teenager is a relatively new invention in the world.
Y él comenzó su taller enseñándonos que la idea de un adolescente, un teenager, es una idea más nueva para el mundo.
Only within the last 60 or 70 years have we called people teenagers.
Solo dentro de 60 o 70 años hemos llamado a esa edad teenagers.
In most cultures around the world, a person was a child until their bodies created sperm or eggs, and then they were an adult.
Casi todos los grupos de personas, un niño era un niño hasta que su cuerpo producía lo que los adultos producen.
So if the God said your body was able to make other children, the gods had spoken and you were now an adult.
Así que si los dioses decían que tu cuerpo ahora puede ser hijos, entonces ellos han dicho que tú eres un adulto.
And now it was time for you, or actually most likely your parents, to find a suitable person for you to have children with.
Y ahora era tiempo para que tú, o más bien tus papás, encontraran a alguien con quien tú puedas tener hijos.
Usually this all happened before a person had reached their 20s.
Usualmente esto pasaba antes de que una persona llegaba a sus 20 años.
Now we say that if a person is able to make other children, wait, just ignore that, pretend it doesn't exist, burn with lust for about a decade or so, and when you're an adult, then it's time.
Y ahora decimos, cuando tu cuerpo está listo para hacer hijos, espera, quémate con ese deseo por como una década, y luego cuando eres un adulto, ese va a ser tu tiempo.
By the way, ask your students, the teenagers that go to your church, when do they become an adult? And you're going to hear a million answers back. When do you think that they become an adult?
De hecho, pregúntale a sus jóvenes cuándo ellos piensan que van a ser un adulto y va a escuchar cientos de respuestas. Pero ¿cuándo pensamos que ellos van a ser adultos?
I actually want to know, when do you guys think that your students think that they become adults?
Me gustaría saber, le estoy preguntando a usted, ¿cuándo creen que los jóvenes son adultos?
As a 21-year-old, I would say that I became an adult at 18 years as well. I would say that as an answer.
A los 18
Okay.
años también otra respuesta. He escuchado cuando mi papá dice que soy un hombre. I've heard the answer when my dad says I'm a man.
Right? Others say when they move out. Yep, I've heard that. When they can drink, when they graduate college, when they graduate high school, when they get their license, when they've had sex for the first time, when they can rent a carpet shampooer from Home Depot. But back in the day, every people group, every culture group, every tribe knew that a person became an adult when their bodies were able to make other humans.
Así que tenemos diferentes respuestas, pero en los tiempos antiguos, cada grupo de personas sabía que el niño se convierte en adulto cuando su cuerpo está listo para hacer o tener hijos.
Most of the issues we face when it comes to teenage sexuality, I believe directly come from the fact that we've gone against the original understanding of what makes a person an adult and all the responsibilities that go with that.
Yo creo que la mayoría de los problemas que tenemos cuando hablamos del sexo antes de matrimonio es que hemos ido en contra de lo que naturalmente dice cuando una persona se convierte en un adulto.
We call them teenagers because we're not ready for them to be adults yet, but they are.
Les decimos adolescentes porque nosotros no estamos listos para que ellos sean adultos, pero ellos están listos.
And you better believe that they're going to experiment what being an adult means, even though they're still not yet an adult. Their bodies have said that they are an adult. And for hundreds of years, thousands of years, every tribal group said, if you can make other humans, you're an adult.
Y debe uno saber y entender que esos jóvenes van a comenzar a experimentar porque su cuerpo les está diciendo que ya es adulto, y todos los grupos en la antigüedad decían que cuando el cuerpo puede hacer hijos es un adulto.
So if you work with teenagers, you are doing an adult ministry.
Así que
You need to see them first and foremost as young adults. That's why books are called young adult books, but they're young adults.
Así que cuando usted está
And even the author, go ahead.
con sus jóvenes, con sus adolescentes, los teenagers, usted debe de tratarlos como adultos pequeños. Por eso se llaman young adults los libros.
So I have a question for you. What does a quinceañera do? What's the purpose of a quinceañera?
Entonces le tengo una pregunta. ¿Cuál es el propósito de una quinceañera?
We just experienced one with one of my cousins, and it's when you stop being a young girl and enter young ladyhood or adulthood, I guess you could say. So, going alongside of what you're saying, it's
At what age?
15 years old.
How old was that person's quinceañera? How old are they?
15.
15. Right. So you have told them that age 15, they're becoming a young lady, a young woman, all of that. And then our kids, because of culture, think that they're not a woman until they're 18 or 21.
Entonces,
This is a new idea.
En las quinceañeras le decimos a los jóvenes, tienes 15 años, ahora estás entrando a ser una mujer, pero nuestra cultura le está diciendo, no, hasta los 18 años va a ser una mujer. Entonces, una nueva idea está ahí.
Let me ask you this. What is there for guys? What in your culture, how do guys realize that they become a young man?
Y déjame preguntarle eso, en su cultura, ¿cómo los muchachos, cómo los jóvenes hombres saben que son adultos ahora?
I think men start maturing at their 30s. That's what it seems like.
In their 30s?
Yeah.
Do you have something that's like a quinceañera for a guy?
¿Hay algo que es como quinceañera, pero para muchachos? Not necessarily, no. Not really.
So it's up to figuring out for a guy when they're a man. Girls know they've gone from being a young lady or a child to a young woman, but guys, they're on their own.
Entonces, es más difícil para los muchachos porque las muchachas sí saben que a los 15 años están entrando a ser mujer.
Tim, I got one. For me, it was when my voice changed.
Yeah.
I hit puberty. To me, it was like,
when your voice changed.
yeah, when puberty, that's when I know I'm a man now. My voice is changing.
Right. Okay.
Puede uno decir.
When boys are 15, we put them in a cage.
I've seen playpens. Playpens are a cage, and the kids are in there very early. In the Jewish culture, how did they realize a boy was becoming a man?
En la cultura judía, el niño iba a ser hombre cuando, ¿cómo? 13 años, 13 years old.
13 years old, they'd have a bar mitzvah. Jesus had a bar mitzvah. Jesus was never a teenager. Jesus was a child. Then his body was able to make other children. And Jesus, probably in his culture, had a bar mitzvah where he became, at age 13, an adult.
Es posible que Jesús tuvo un bar mitzvah. Entonces, Jesús nunca fue un teenager, un adolescente. Él era niño, y luego a los 13 años se hizo hombre.
And I say all this because we look around and try to figure out why kids are messed up sexually. And that's because we, in the last 100 years, said, we recognize what your body is going through, but hold on.
Digo todo esto porque estamos hablando y pensando en por qué los jóvenes están teniendo dificultad con el sexo, pero es porque en los últimos 100 años hemos dicho, entendemos lo que está pasando en tu cuerpo, pero espérate.
I have two stories left, two other stories really quickly, and then I'll be done.
Para terminar.
There's a great story. I'm very thankful about Christian for doing this because I have a book that I was given when I first started youth ministry. This book is from 1988. Are you ready?
Estoy muy agradecido con Cristian de darme esta oportunidad porque Tengo este libro que fue escrito en 1988. Dice,
Can you actually read that, or is that backwards?
No, we can see it.
Dice,
Backwards?
No, it's fine.
20 papas calientes que los
Uh,
cristianos no quieren tocar.
So these are 20 hot. This came from 1988. 20 hot potatoes Christians are afraid to touch.
Y eso
So
es
they were asking about the hot
1988.
questions of the day. Then, can anybody see some of those questions?
No, it's a little bit blurry.
Y ahí tienen una de las preguntas, varias de las preguntas que
Okay.
preguntaban.
I'll read these. How do we answer the challenge of AIDS? What about women preachers? What do I do if I'm sexually starved? Should we pull our kids out of public schools? Can rich people get into heaven? Does Christianity have any good news for homosexuals? Should preachers start preaching against sports? That's just some of them. Tony, the guy who wrote that, is a professor at a Christian university.
Y la persona que escribió ese libro es un profesor en una universidad cristiana.
He asked his students, what would different religious leaders do if they met a prostitute?
Él le preguntó a sus estudiantes qué harían líderes religiosos si conocieran a una prostituta.
How would they respond?
¿Cómo responderían?
How would Muhammad respond to a prostitute?
¿Cómo respondería Mohammed a una prostituta?
How would Buddha respond to a prostitute?
¿Y el Buda cómo?
How would Jesus respond to a prostitute?
¿Cómo respondería Jesús?
And one student in his class, an agnostic kid, didn't believe in God, said,
Un estudiante en su clase que no creía en Dios dijo,
I don't believe Jesus ever met a prostitute.
yo no creo que Jesús conoció a una prostituta.
Dr. Campolo was quick to say, well, we may think that Mary Magdalene was probably a prostitute, and started to explain all of that.
Y el doctor comenzó a decir, pues creemos que María Magdalena era prostituta y comenzó a explicar todo eso.
And the agnostic kid in the class said, no. Do you think that when Jesus looked into the eyes of that person, of Mary, of that lady, he saw a prostitute, or did he see the person he created them to be?
Y ese joven que no creía en Dios le dijo, no, ¿tú crees que Jesús le miró a los ojos a esa mujer y él vio a una prostituta? No, él vio a la persona quien él creó.
We like to label people by their sins, but Jesus saw them for who he created them to be.
Nosotros le queremos poner un nombre a una persona por sus pecados, pero Jesús los ve como los hizo él.
So he said, I think Jesus never met a prostitute.
Entonces él dijo, yo no creo que Jesús conoció a alguna prostituta.
Those are labels that we have put on people.
Esos son los nombres que nosotros le hemos puesto a las personas.
One of the things that we have to do as Christian leaders is see people the way that God intended them to be.
Una de
We
las
need to
cosas-
see people first and foremost the way God had made them.
Una de las cosas que nosotros tenemos que hacer como líderes es ver a las personas como Dios los creó.
One last story. This is my story. You need to know I am a product of premarital sex.
Y otra historia, esta es mi historia. Usted tiene que saber que yo soy un producto de sexo antes del matrimonio.
My parents that I have never met, my birth mom and my birth dad, had sex, and he was married to someone else, and she was a 19-year-old girl that was not married.
Mis papás que yo nunca he conocido, él era un hombre casado y ella era una muchacha de 19 años.
I have never met my birth mom and birth dad. I found out all this information when I was a teenager.
Yo nunca los conocí a ellos. Yo aprendí de todo esto cuando era un adolescente.
When my birth mom realized that the guy that she was pregnant, she went back to the guy that she had sex with, my birth dad, and said, can you help me raise this child?
Cuando mi mamá biológica se dio cuenta que estaba embarazado conmigo, fue a mi papá biológico y le preguntó si él le podía ayudar a tener este hijo.
He said no.
Él le dijo que no.
My birth mom's parents said no.
los papás de mi mamá biológica dijeron que no.
And then my birth mom's grandma up in another state in Oregon said, come up here, I will help you have this child and we'll give it up for adoption.
Y luego la abuelita de mi mamá biológica le dijo a mi mamá que ella podía venir con ella en Oregon y ella le iba a ayudar a tener el bebé, pero lo iban a dar por adopción.
My grandmother, who I've never met, this grandmother I've never met, she made sure that my birth mom was taken care of, took me to the hospital where I was born, and I was then quickly, actually probably, I think it was within 2 or 3 days, given to my adoptive parents, who I consider my parents.
Y esa abuelita que yo nunca he conocido, cuidó de mi mamá biológica, nos llevó al hospital cuando iba a nacer, y dentro de 2 o 3 días yo fui dado a los papás que yo considero mis papás.
What's really interesting, the reason I have the parents that I have today is my birth mom specified that she'd like me to go to a Christian, preferably Nazarene family.
Y la razón de que estoy con los padres que tengo hoy es porque mi mamá biológica dijo que ella prefería que yo fuera dado a una pareja cristiana nazarena.
My parents, the ones that I consider my parents, my adoptive parents, had literally just within a few days before said, I think we'll begin the process of adoption. We're a Nazarene couple. We go to a Nazarene church. And because they said they're Nazarene, and because this young lady, 19-year-old girl that had me, wanted me to go to a Nazarene family, that's why I'm adopted by the parents that I've had in my life.
Y mis padres adoptivos, a los que yo considero mis papás, ellos algunos días antes habían dicho, pues vamos a comenzar esta jornada de adopción y nosotros somos una pareja nazarena. Entonces, como mi mamá biológica había dicho que ella quería una pareja nazarena, así nos encontramos.
So if I ever met my mom, my birth mom, would I ever tell her not to have had premarital sex? No. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here.
Entonces, si yo tendría algún día la oportunidad de conocer a mi mamá biológica, yo le diría que no tuviera sexo antes del matrimonio. No, porque si no, yo no estuviera aquí.
I am so grateful to the people that God put in her life, especially my grandmother, who I've never met.
Yo estoy muy agradecido con las personas que Dios puso en su vida, especialmente mi abuelita que nunca he conocido.
These people who showed her grace, who showed her love, who showed her forgiveness, who showed her what love, perfect love, looked like sacrificially in the midst of my mom's uncertainty.
Esas personas que le dieron gracia y misericordia y amor perfecto en ese tiempo de inseguridad para mi mamá.
That's what we are called to do as Christians. We are called to be like Christ to people that might be experiencing uncertainty, shame, all of that kind of stuff. What we're called to do in any situation is be like Christ.
Como cristianos, a eso somos llamados, a ser como Cristo para las personas que están en incertidumbre, a las personas que están confundidas.
And I'm very thankful that I am here today because people loved my mom regardless of whether or not she had had premarital sex.
Yo estoy muy agradecido con Dios que alguien amó a mi mamá, aunque ella tuvo sexo antes del matrimonio.
It's not that we want people to be doing that because there was probably a lot of brokenness and hardships because of that.
No es que queremos que la gente haga eso porque quizá fue mucho dolor y mucho quebrantamiento por eso.
But we're called to show love to people the way that Jesus would.
Pero nosotros somos llamados a amar como Cristo.
And so there you go. That's what I've learned in how to deal with this as a youth pastor.
Y eso es lo que he aprendido yo en cómo tomar ese tema como pastor de jóvenes.
And that's my story. Thank you.
Esa es la historia. Gracias.